Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. According to August data from the National Bureau of Statistics, more than 80% of house prices in 70 large and medium-sized cities rose compared with July. Faced with the rising prices, many local governments have reinstated policies such as mortgage and purchase restrictions to curb overheating in the property market. What are the underlying reasons behind the overheating property market? Will continued price rises lead to property bubbles? And what can be done to bring some areas' property market madness under control? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mo Tianquan, board chairman of Fund.com. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
Is it a boom or bust moment for China's property market? Such concern is exacerbated with local government policies rushing in during the National Day holidays. Beijing raised the down payment for first-time homebuyers to no less than 35%, and that for second home purchases to no less than 50%. The northern port city, Tianjin, has now banned non-residents from buying a second home in the downtown area. Second and third-tier cities such as Jinan, Zhengzhou and Chengdu also announced new restrictions on property purchases, attempting to cool soaring home prices. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics, the average new home price in 70 cities in August climbed an annual 9.2%, up from 7.9% in July. The coastal city, Xiamen, and inland city, Hefei, have outperformed the tech hub, Shenzhen, rising 40% from a year earlier, the sharpest price spike, while other second and third-tier cities such as Nanjing, Fuzhou, Tianjin, and Hangzhou have also registered a higher than 20% annual increase. Local governments soon moved to curb the property frenzy. At least 10 cities have either resumed home purchase restrictions or raised minimum down payments. And with housing acting as an economic pillar, exerting an outsized influence over China's banks, heavy industries, builders, and households, a runaway property market will surely trigger more aggressive policy tightening measures.
Welcome to Dialogue. People won't feel surprised that there will be some bubbles or there will be some kind of modest rises in the first-tier cities in the property market. What did surprise many observers, I'm afraid, is that such things occurred in the second-tier cities. What are the driving forces behind this chapter of the housing bubbles?
Yes, recently we have seen a price increase, a sharp increase actually in those second-tier cities. I think there are several things behind. One thing is that the so-called fourth-tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou rised a lot in the past, 18 months ago, 1.5 years ago. Especially like Shenzhen, annually it's over 50% increase. And, 1 year, 12 months later, and now it's the second-tier cities like Wuhan, Hefei, Zhengzhou, these cities. So I think it's a natural way for the price to go from city to city. That's one reason. And second reason is really, those fourth-tier, tier 1 cities, they're national centers. They are attracting more population to their cities. The new, cities, second-tier cities, they are regional centers, and they are attracting surrounding population to their cities, to their regional center cities as well. So this is similar. So I think it's also natural for those cities to have an increase in their property market.
To deal with the rising prices, many local governments, as I said in the lead-in, have put forward strict restrictions to curb speculation. What do you think of their measures and the impact upon the prices?
I think, frankly, I think the sharp increase of the tier 2 cities property market is partially relates to the government policies. In one way, the government is in a kind of dilemma. In one way, the government budget, their income comes from the selling of the land. So they would like to see the price of the selling of the land as high as possible so that they can get more money in, support their budget. And on the other hand, it's also a natural thing, and it's the responsibility for the government to make sure the price of properties will not increase too sharp, too highly, so that people, the citizens, can afford to buy properties. So government is really in a dilemma. In the recent wave of increase in the property market, I think in 2 years ago, those cities they are trying to support the property market. They kind of released different policies to support the property market. But most recently, with the sharp increase of the property market, they are trying to curb the market in a sharp increase in the price.
But I'm afraid the government cannot play two roles of both the doctor and the patient. Now, there is a structural contradiction, basically. So, are you optimistic or the other way around about the silver lining?
I think it's challenging for the government, at least based on the current situation. The government, especially the governors of the province and the city mayors, they are mostly 4 years or 8 years terms. So, to make sure they can have enough budget to support their projects when they are in position. I think they need money to do that. So they want to see they can have a good income from the auction of the land. So that is one of the reasons. I think the government is really in a dilemma, in dealing with this. It's tough for them.
In other words, it's the local government who conspired with the property developers in pushing up the prices.
I would not conspire to do that, but it is in their interest in one way to make sure the property market is in a good shape, in a good price, so that when they do the auction of the land, they have a reasonably good income from the auction.
From my first question of the interview, you may have felt clearly that I deliberately or not used the word of bubbles in my first question, and that indeed leads to the issue of whether there will be more of the local debts. If that's to be true, what will be the financial vehicles to help avert the disasters?
I think the bubble, we're looking at talking about two sectors. One's the real estate sector, and the other one is the general economy. With the recent sharp increase in the property market, I think it's abnormal, and it will needs to a situation of a bubble if the price increase is not put under control. So that's one way. And on the other hand, actually, the property bubble is not the worst. The worst is that if this property bubble leads to the general economy bubble, that will be the worst.
That's what I mean. Systematic financial risks as a result of the burst bubbles in the housing market will lead to disasters for the national economy.
Yeah, there is a potential, it's going to happen in that way.
Let's take a closer look at who are those purchases of the houses in the second-tier cities. I mean, usually we have a robust demand from the younger generation of consumers who buy their first homes. But what about the chance for those who invest in the real estate market and who would just cause more of the speculation instead of for the very use of the house and for the family life?
I think in the recent wave of property hot or the price increase, I would speculate that almost 50% of those property buyers are investment oriented, so which is not good for a healthy development of the market.
If this is to be true, and I believe it's true, 50% of them are speculative investors in this real estate market. What about the draconian regulations adopted by a municipal government of Hangzhou, where the G20 summit took place, to, for example, prevent buyers of the second home from making more investment? Because Hangzhou is, after all, one of the most beautiful tourist attractions. Following the G20 summit, it's going to be more of such a magnetic, very attractive places for investment and for sightseeing. Do you think this measure, among all others by the local government, will help curb the alleged overheating?
Definitely, the answer is, and most recently, including Hangzhou, Hefei, Wuhan, all of these cities which had a high increase of properties in the past quarter or 6 months, they had curbing policies, or restrictive policies to buy properties. I think it will be good and it will be useful for the short period of time to cool down the market. But in the longer period of time, I think we need to think fundamentally. Fundamentally, what is the demand and what is supply? Do we have, if we have enough, very strong demand, do we have enough, supply? So which
you mean the local demands won't be sustainable? And therefore, long term, you express grave concerns about the systematic risks.
Well, I think in those national centers, like the 4 big Tier 1 cities, and those about 20 or 30 regional centers, the provincial capitals, I think the demand will continue to be strong in the coming 5 to 10 years because the economy is centralized into those areas, and the population and jobs also concentrate into those centers. So demand for properties will keep on strong. But the supply, I think, at this stage, is not enough. It's especially in the Tier 1, the 4 big cities, like in Beijing. And we have to restrict the people to buy, and we have to restrict the, so kind of a hukou. Other people, they cannot have a hukou in Beijing. So the situation in those big cities and in the hot regional centers, it's really, I think, the supply is not enough there.
As the low value added manufacturing centers are relocated from more prosperous coastal areas to hinterland areas such as Chengdu, which is yet another major second-tier city, we fail to see similar rise in housing prices. I mean, don't you think the image of second-tier cities should not be simplified by the surge in housing prices like in Nanjing and Zhengzhou? We don't see a monolithic picture, do we?
Well, when we look at the market, the property market in China,
Chengdu is the capital city.
It's always, there are several markets, like Tier 1 cities and Tier 2 cities, and even in Tier 2 cities, like Chengdu is Tier 2 cities, Xi'an is the Tier 2 cities, and Chongqing is probably in between, close to Tier 2 cities.
Is a major municipality under the direct administration of Beijing. I'm talking about Chengdu, capital city of Sichuan province, which is yet another major place of the economy.
Yeah, right. So Chengdu, the property price in Chengdu has been stable or low for some years. I think in my memory, more than 3 years. And actually the price in Chongqing has been low and stable for 5 years, and the Xi'an for another 3 years. So these cities are different from Nanjing, Hefei, or Wuhan, these very hot cities at this moment. But don't be too optimistic. We've seen signals recently, very recently, in the past 3 weeks or so. Chengdu's price and Xi'an's price are going up.
Quietly moving up.
Quietly at this stage. If we do not do something, and it's my expectation that the prices in Chengdu and the Xi'an may also go high.
What do you think of the struggles, if any, between the buyers, the consumers, and the property developers, to say nothing of the third party, the government, at the local level? Now, it's been the tradition and habits, die-hard habits for Chinese consumers not to buy their properties when the prices go down. They tend to make the investment and buy their first and second homes when the prices are moving up very quickly. In Chinese, 买涨不买跌, quite against the habits and pattern of consumption in Western property markets. What do you think of such a law that governs the mindset of the consumers?
I think it's a kind of a behavior issue. It's
behavioral problems.
Yeah, right. And people, they're buying properties like they're doing investment. Really not for their own, purely for their own use. So we have been seeing very recently, and the buyers' behave is very similar to the behaves from the stock market. So they are buying properties like they are investing in the stocks. So that's since happening, especially if 50% or even more property buyers there for investment purpose. So they will behave much similar to the ordinary or stock market investment. So I think that's not good for the healthy development of China's property market.
Vincent, on October the 8th, Shanghai will implement a registration of real estate throughout the whole city. How will this registration affect the assessment and collection of property taxes, and by extension, the property market itself?
Property tax has been in testing for, I think in my memory, for 3 years in Shanghai and Chongqing. And however, the effectiveness is very limited up to today. But in the longer run, in my opinion, and property tax is a kind of property taxes in every country. It is going to be happen. So based on the experiences accumulated in Shanghai and Chongqing, I expected that the whole country, especially those major cities, will have property tax in the future. Probably not in a short period of time, but in the longer run, in 5 years or so.
And do you think the strongest opposition is likely to come from the governments instead of other interest groups? Because
I think the strongest opposition to the property tax is probably from the household, from the consumers. This is not a purely simple economic issue. It's going to become a social issue, or even more complicated, because you are trying to get money out of every family of the society.
Do you think are you suggesting
that's
this is a political
tough.
issue because the local government officials are afraid of having social instability because of the rise in property tax?
I would say that at least it's one of the issues.
One of the major concerns for the local government. You are watching Dialogue with Vincent Mo, board chairman of Fund.com. We're discussing the impact of the latest rise in housing prices in the Chinese property market. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back, Vincent. While the housing market is still strong in large and medium-sized cities, most third-tier cities face piled up stock and falling prices. Local governments have to take positive measures to attract investment. However, the confidence in small cities seems to remain very weak. Will the rising price of second-tier cities influence the third-tier cities?
I think the answer is yes. It's like the temperature. If the temperature in the big cities is becoming higher, and the surrounding cities will become definitely going up as well. So
excuse me, Vincent. When we were discussing the latest happenings in the second-tier cities, we mentioned briefly the creation of jobs for the regional centers, like capital cities of different provinces and municipalities. But third-tier city will be an entirely different situation, where young people will hardly find any jobs for them. Most of them would, of course, go to the first-tier cities and second-tier ones, where they're going to have more opportunities. For example, for startup companies to be involved by state-owned enterprises, whatever the prospects, the chances are far more than in the third-tier cities. So what's the reason? What are the reasons for a likely ripple effect of coming from the second-tier cities to the lower ones?
Well, the answer, as I said first, it's going to be positive for the third-tier cities. Because the labor in second-tier cities, the prices are going up. Mm-hmm. But that's for a short period of time. In the longer run, it's the fundamental demand and supply which are going to decide the price of the third-tier cities. So in the longer run, I would not expect the third cities, the property price in those third cities are going to increase as what happened in some of the second-tier cities. So in the longer run, it's my thinking that the third-tier cities, they're going to be there stable, and there will not be extra or stronger demand for property prices. I would not think it's worth to do a lot to kind of destock the properties in those tier 3 cities. I would let it go. Whatever it is, it's going to die, let it die, because there is no fundamental to support the property market in the fourth tier or third tier cities.
A close look in our broad review of the property market, you're going to come to the conclusion that since central authorities in China encourage rapid development of the service industry and the next wave of urbanization in the first and second tier cities, the ripple effects of such urbanization would hardly affect the third tier cities, where young people, as I said earlier, would go to those places for job opportunities. And therefore, without the fiscal revenue coming out of the service industry in the third tier cities, I mean, local governments are likely to go bankrupt, and that will mean political risks for authorities higher in Beijing at the provincial level. What do you think of such kind of uncertainty?
I think this is a very fundamental question here. When we look at the property market, and to me, the tier one, the 4 tier 1 cities are national centers, and there will be another 20 plus regional centers. I think eventually these areas are going to attract most of the population, of the country. Mm-hmm. So in doing the structural reform, or in doing the longer master plan of the cities, of the big cities, I think we do need to focus on the big cities rather than focusing on the 4th tier or 3rd tier cities. Those cities, or even smaller county or villages, most of them are going to die. We have seen this, in the whole world. If we go to America, go to European countries, we went to a village, rural villages. They're just dying villages there. Nobody wants to save them.
Ghost cities.
Yeah, it's a ghost city. It's a ghost town. So it's natural, development of the world, of the society. So in China, I think it's going to happen again. So in doing the property market policy or industry policy, I think we need to fundamentally think it right. So we need to focus on the big cities, those 20 plus the 4 national centers, and we need to expand these cities and make sure the demand is here and the supply is enough, so that when people come to these big cities, they can enjoy a reasonable priced property.
By the end of the day, we have to ask over and over, again and again, what's going to happen to the 3rd tier cities? Are they going to be forgotten corners? Will we undertake instead poverty alleviation programs to encourage local development in those corners? Let's look at the issue of a supply-side structural reform. It's meant to aim at motivating the market dynamic by using its dominant role in resources allocation. In the Chinese property market, Vincent, what structural reforms should the central government and local governments implement to target it effectively? We have perhaps discussed some of the issues involved in this question.
I think the structural reform is very important, for this real estate industry. As we just talked about, we need to think about the demand, and we are the demand. I think the demand for properties, they're focusing on the big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and 20 plus other regional, centers. I think this is fundamental. If the demand is here, and how can we do to do the supply side? That's the structural reform. So let me pick, Beijing. It's always my thinking, Beijing, we have about 25 million people now. How many people we're going to have in 10 years? I would expect probably we're going to have 50 million people. And why not? Because so many people, they want to come to Beijing. Beijing is the center. And also when they come, we need to support them. We need to, with enough supply to make sure the property price is not going to hike to a unreasonable price. So are we ready for those 50 million people? So we may ask why 50 million people, but if we look at the whole world, if we look at Seoul in South Korea, look at Mexico City in Mexico, Paris in France, those cities have about 20% of their whole country's population. And even if we're going to have 50 million people in Beijing, and it's still about 5%, of the whole country's population. It's going to happen. It's a natural way. So how are we going to expand, to the satellite cities of Beijing? Are we ready? Do we have a master plan for that? So that is the key. That is the structural reform. And this structural reform is kind of a core of the demand.
I'm glad that you put your finger on the issue of the demographic changes. China is getting old before it gets rich, and we're going to have millions of pensioners and retirees who will have to make a choice about whether they should live in heartland of major cities or move elsewhere. For example, choose some of the properties in the third-tier city as the nursing homes. You have your research, think tanks. Have they done any serious studies about the nursing homes for the pensioners?
We do. We have some study on that, and there is a huge demand for that, for the elder housing or nursing housing in the coming 10 years or longer. But we should not be over optimistic about that. Two reasons. One reason is that are we going to have enough kind of a nursing housing in the surrounding areas of the big cities? So that is the economic issue. Who are going to develop them? Are they going to be fully supported with different services there? And on the other hand, there is a tradition issue here in Chinese culture. In Chinese culture, the grandparents and parents, they do not want to live, without close to their sons and grandsons,
children,
and the children and the country supporting their parents, people, they do not want to be recognized like they are sending their parents away. So although theoretically there is a huge demand for that, but practically it may not happen here in China.
In the case of inflation, many investors, including ordinary people in China, have chosen to buy property instead of gold or stocks. Some even go abroad to invest in the overseas property market. What motivates them to make this decision?
Well, multiple reasons, and I do that. One, property market, properties is the easiest, asset to manage. You don't need to look at it for months. It's still there. It's not going to go away. So that's one thing. And second thing for us, for Chinese here in the major cities, in the past 10 years, the property price has been keeping on going up all the way. 5 to 10 times. In the worst cities, probably 5 times in the past 5 years. And I mean the tier 2 and tier 1 cities, and the best city and the good cities, it's more than 10 times. So economically, it's a very, very good investment. So those are the two reasons behind. Of course, there is a third one, is that property is kind of a inflation protecting asset or anti-inflation asset. So to make sure our money is still worth when it was before, so investing into property is a very good alternative to do that.
Except for the possibility that the bubbles will burst one day. You have underestimated perhaps the risks, but I don't think so. You are an old hand in analyzing the property market. With that, we come to the conclusion of this edition of Dialogue about the prospects of the Chinese housing prices. Will it go up further, or are we going to have bubbles? I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.